The article says, as bands of Jewish and Arab citizens fought one another and police in towns across Israel for a third night early Thursday, Israelis worried that the battle inside the country may be harder to stop than the air war still being waged with Gaza. And I'm telling you, the war between Israel and Gaza is not as much of a threat as the war that's taking place within Israel. The ethnic fighting, the ethnic violence that's taking place within Israel. Chaos erupted in Israeli cities with mixed Jewish Arab populations on Wednesday night, marking an escalation in the country's worst communal violence in 2 decades. The Israeli media and local residents alike have warned about the threat of civil war in the country, even as Israel and Hamas have been engaged in the most intense exchange of rockets and bombs since the 2014 Gaza war. In some cases, Arab Israelis protesting in support of Palestinians in Gaza and Jerusalem have squared off against right wing Jewish Israelis and police, and these confrontations have sparked riots and looting. In other cases, groups of vigilante Jews have marched through Arab areas, targeting shops and individuals with violence. And yet other cases, and in yet other cases, Arabs have attacked Jews passing through Arab neighborhoods. Videos shot in the central Israeli town of Bat Yam show Jewish nationalists pulling a man whom they believe to be Arab from a car and brutally beating him on the street. The Israeli media described the incident as, quote, an attempted lynching in prime time, unquote. The man was admitted to a Tel Aviv hospital with serious injuries, according to the Associated Press. In the coastal city of Acre, Arabs critically injured a Jewish man with rocks and iron bars, and then the crowd attacked the ambulance, taking him to the hospital, the AP reported. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday said his government would use administrative detention, imprisonment without formal charge against those involved in civil unrest. So there you have it, everyone. There's the violence. And everybody, the problem with talking about these subjects is everybody wants you to pick a side all the time. People are like, are you on the side of the Palestinians or are you on the side of the Jews? And it's like, well, to be honest with you, I really don't want to pick a side because both sides have problems. With the Israelis, you have this emphasis on Zionism, emphasis on ethnic Zionism, ethnic nationalism, obsessed with the idea of Israel being purely Jewish. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that sort of belief in the political atmosphere of Israel. Only a Jew should be a citizen, etc., etc. There's too much of that goes on, and then you have this strange entitlement amongst some Zionists that is quite dangerous. For example, like walking into a Palestinian family's home and saying, this house belongs to ours because it's on land that belonged to Jews before 1948. Goodness gracious. There was one story I read where in 2009, settlers took over half of the home that belonged to a Palestinian family. Half. And this was a Palestinian family that had been living in this home since the 1950s. They take half of the home in 2009. And then for over a decade, they've been tormenting this Palestinian family. And then now they're like, okay, give us the rest of the house. Because this land belonged to Jews in the 1950s, so we can just take it over. And then you have some Jewish guy from America walking into some Palestinian family's home and saying, oh, this house belongs to me now. Why? Well, because it belonged to Jews before 1948. So because it belonged to Jews before 1948, that means any Jewish person can take the house. The house is now free game for any Jewish person to come and take. That's anarchy. That's crazy. It's crazy. And the Palestinian woman tells the guy, Jacob, she knows who the guy is. She says, Jacob, this is my home. You're stealing my home. And Jacob says, yeah, you're right. I am stealing it. But if I don't steal it, someone else will. So what are you mad at me for? The utter narcissism that's seen in some of these types of people, it's mind-boggling to me. Mind-boggling. But then you have the Palestinian side, and they'll go to some Jewish area. They'll throw the Israeli flag down, replace it with a Palestinian flag. They'll talk about how Israel has no right to exist. Of course, Israel has a right to exist. Israel has a right to exist. It's an official country. It has the right to defend itself. Absolutely. And I think it's crazy when people say that Israel should not exist, or that Israel is not a legitimate country. It obviously is a legitimate country. Um, there's too much craziness on both sides. Although I will say, in all fairness to Israel, most of the violence within Israel is being committed by Palestinian gangs. That's at least what I have read. The majority of the violence is being done by Palestinian gangs who throw rocks and they got weapons and they cause problems. A lot of this began when Palestinians started rioting for the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then they started having clashes with the police. But then you have the bombing of Gaza, and all these people have been killed in the bombing, and you have to ask yourself, when is this going to end? When is this going to end? You know when it's going to end? It's going to end when people stop obsessing over a city. And I know this is going to sound controversial for some people. You know, maybe you're Catholic and you want to revive the Crusades or something like that, and you want to take over Jerusalem or something. But people got to stop obsessing over cities. You know, people say, well, Jerusalem is a holy city. It's in the Bible, so we have to control it. We got to take it over. And people kill each other over a city. They worship a city. The Catholic Church does not take a side. Have you ever noticed the Catholic Church does not take a side in these sorts of situations, in these sorts of conflicts? The Catholic Church will sympathize more so with the Palestinians. I will admit that. But for the most part, you're not really hearing the Pope, talking about waving the Palestinian flag. And you'll never see the Vatican come out and say, we got to support Israel. And you don't hear the Vatican talking about how we have to retake Jerusalem either. Why? Because the Catholic Church learned its lesson. Because the Catholics were obsessed with Jerusalem, just like the Muslims are. They were obsessed with it. They wanted to take the city. Listen, and if you're going to argue with me about this, that's fine. I'll just let you know I probably read more books on the Crusades than you have. And I'm not saying that was a way to be cocky. It's just, I'm just telling you, I've read a lot about this stuff. I've read a lot of medieval literature. I've read a lot of books from the Middle Ages. I've read a lot of books from monks and priests and knights who wrote about this sort of thing. And you have to ask yourself, reading all this medieval history, was it really worth it? Because the Catholics took over Jerusalem in the late 11th century. They took over Jerusalem. Excuse me. They took over Jerusalem. They defeated the Muslims. Okay, it was a glorious victory. True, glorious victory, absolutely. But they couldn't control it. Then the Catholics were killing each other. They were vying for power over the city of Jerusalem. Which European family is going to control Jerusalem? Who's going to control it? They start killing each other. Before you know it, you have, Genoans and Pisans fighting and killing each other over 50 acres of land somewhere in the Holy Land. Something like that happened. It could have been Genoans and Pisans, or it could have been Venetians and Genoans, I don't remember. But Italians were killing each other over 50 acres in the Holy Land. It was craziness. And then it came to the point where the Crusaders thought, okay, if we're going to finally crush the Muslims, we got to hit them where it hurts. So they invaded Egypt. And this happened in the, I want to say, late 13th century or so, with St. Philip, King St. Philip. Or not King Philip, sorry, King Louis. King Louis, I believe it was Louis the Ninth. We call him St. Louis or St. Louis. The city in Missouri was named after this guy. He invades Egypt, and at first it seems like the Christians are just, having a landslide victory over the Muslims. And then before you know it, the Christians get slaughtered in, I believe it was called the Battle of Maimuna. And tens of thousands of Catholic French knights were butchered. Tens of thousands. Butchered. Around 30,000 or so of them were killed, if you want to get down to the numbers. And it was a complete disaster. And that was one of the things that led to a lot of the anti-clericalism that really became popular in late medieval Europe. and then you get into the Renaissance period, and eventually you go into the Protestant Reformation. And a lot of that anti-clericalism was fomented because people said the Catholic Church led these men to their deaths. The Crusades, for the most part, were not successful. They weren't. I used to be very idealistic about this sort of thing, but I read enough of the history to tell you that they weren't that very successful. They weren't very successful. In the beginning, they were. There were some victories, yes, but as far as controlling Jerusalem goes, it was extremely difficult. And it was a nightmare, and a lot of people died. And so then you look at that verse from the book of Zechariah, where God says, whoever elevates the city of Jerusalem, I'll tear them apart. They'll be torn apart. They'll be torn to pieces. So the Catholics learned their lesson. They said, well, we dealt with that before. We're not getting into that again. But the Jews and the Muslims, they're still at it. And once they stop obsessing over Jerusalem, there'll be peace. At least for the most part. I mean, they're still not going to get along because there's ethnic differences, cultural differences. But nonetheless, the whole thing is over this Al-Aqsa Mosque. This whole thing is over this mount, the Temple Mount, and Al-Aqsa. And people don't realize this. Why are Muslims so obsessed over Jerusalem? They're more obsessed over Jerusalem than they are the Kaaba. They're more obsessed with Jerusalem than they are with the Kaaba and Mecca. They are. They're more obsessed with it. How do I know this? Because the Muslims, how many times did they bomb the Kaaba? How many times they bombed it? I think Saddam Hussein bombed the Kaaba. The Ottomans don't care about it. They just see Mecca as a means to power, as a way of religious power. But once you start talking about Jerusalem, things get really, really crazy. Really crazy. Really fast. And what you're seeing right now in Israel, it's going to escalate. Not just regionally speaking, but continentally speaking, internationally speaking. Because you have Turkey talking about sending in some international peace force, which is really just a way to promote this idea of a international coalition that Turkey will be the preponderating force in, and it'll just be a cover-up so that they can have the Turkish military in the Holy Land. Just like after the First World War, and I know it seems like I'm getting into a different topic, but it's in line with the theme that I'm speaking of. Just like after World War I, Japan said, we got to fight communism in Russia. We got to do an international coalition, peacekeeping mission, and support the White Army to overthrow the Bolsheviks. Great idea. America sends their troops into Russia. Japan sends their troops into Russia as part of this international coalition. But hey, Japan had the biggest army in the whole coalition. Why? Because Japan wanted to take the Sakhalin, and they wanted to take that Vladivostok area right near Japan. And America's like, hey, Japan, you got to withdraw your troops. And Japan's like, yeah, sure, we'll withdraw, but we're going to keep some troops in Sakhalin. All these international coalitions, these ideas at times are just, well, actually every time, they're just ways for certain countries to expand their military hegemony. That's what Turkey wants to do. That's what Turkey's been doing in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's what Turkey's been doing in northern Syria. That's what Turkey's doing now in Azerbaijan with the Artsakh conflict. It's all the same thing. So you have the Middle Eastern quagmire over this controversy. But then on the side of that, don't forget, you have the European Union. And the European Union doesn't sympathize with Israel. They don't. As much as the Nazis and the EU want you to think that the EU is some Jewish-controlled Zionist state, the EU does not sympathize with Zionism. It doesn't sympathize with Israel. It doesn't. I mean, Germany has something of an ambassador to the West Bank. And the guy that they commissioned to be the German representative for the Palestinians was caught liking some post by David Duke on Twitter. I mean, what does that tell you? This is a German politician, and he's not a member of the AfD. He's not a member of some German far-right party. He was a Christian Democrat. A Christian Democrat is liking some stuff from David Duke because it's critical of the Jews, and he's a representative for Germany to the Palestinian people. What does that tell you? What does that tell you? And the problem is that a lot of Palestinians sympathize with Hitler. Enough of them do. Tons of people in Turkey sympathize with Hitler. Mein Kampf was the number one bestseller in Turkey. So what does this tell us? It tells us that another Holocaust is going to happen. That's what it tells us. Another Holocaust is going to happen. It's going to happen. It may not happen in Poland again. It may not happen in Dachau and Warsaw and in Ravensbrück. It's going to happen in Israel. And you have, so much tension between the Germans and the Israelis. People don't realize this. It's been going on for a long time. Back in, 2011, I believe, Germany, or 2012, somewhere in that 20-teens era, Germany wanted to build natural gas plants in Iran. And right when Germany proposed the idea, the pro-Israel lobby, and I don't say this in a pejorative way, I'm not saying this as a conspiracy, but there were let's just say pro-Israel activists began to say that Germany shouldn't be doing this. Germany should have no business dealings with Iran. And then you have the situation with the Iran deal. This Iran deal, my God, this isn't over, guys. The Iran deal is not over. The whole controversy around this stuff, it's not over. It's going to continue on. This Iran deal stuff, what Trump did with the Iran deal, it's going to have serious ramifications. It's going to cause a ripple effect that's going to expand for years to come. We're still seeing it. Trump pulls out of the Iran deal in 2018, and the EU says we're going to do deals with Iran. We're going to do business deals with the Iranians. We don't care what Trump says. We don't care what Israel says. Pro-Israel activists in Germany say, no, you shouldn't be doing this. You should be listening to America. And then you have Germans thinking, well, why are we listening to you guys? We're Germany. We're a powerful industrial country. We don't have to listen to you. And then the EU, the Germans really, but we'll just say the EU, technically speaking. The EU then says we're going to do some financial channels as conduits by which to continue doing business with the Iranians, bypassing America's control. And then Germany is doing this thing with Russia, with the pipeline. And again, this is going against American interest, American foreign policy. That's why the Americans, they started to do sanctions on European companies involved in this pipeline. And who's a big ally to Russia? Iran is a big ally to Russia. They're big oil business partners. They're close allies in the Middle East. Iran is a Russian proxy, just like Hamas is a Russian proxy. Hamas is a Russian proxy. Because Hamas is a proxy for Iran, and Iran is backed by the Russians. Hamas is a proxy for the Iranians. So the Germans sympathize with Hamas. The Germans sympathize with the Palestinians. The Germans sympathize with the Iranians. They want to make money with them. And the Germans are doing a business deal with the Russians against the demands of the Americans. Well, what's happening right here? What's happening is you're seeing the breakdown of the whole post-World War II order. You're seeing the breakdown of the American empire. That's what you're seeing, everyone. The breakdown of the American empire. And America now has Joe Biden as the president, and he's not really as strong of a leader. And you have the Germans that are upset that America is trying to tell them what to do. The Germans don't like that. The Germans want to break free from the American empire. So they're making deals with the Russians. They want to make deals with the Iranians. At the same time, the Germans sympathize with the Palestinians. The Germans historically have been allies with the Turks. You're seeing the breakdown of the American empire and the rise of these big power players, Turkey, Iran, Germany. It's all happening, everyone. That's what's taking place. And as these tensions increase in the Middle East, so does the international interest for the Middle East also increase. You're going to see the rise of Turkey. You're going to see Germany getting more and more involved in the East, more and more involved in Africa, as we've been seeing in Mali. Closer and closer to the Iranians, closer and closer to the Turks. It's happening, everyone.